Welcome back, ladies and gents, to the Calling in Antwerp here for day 2 of competition. We're finally deep into those elimination rounds. Looking forward to seeing who can come out on top of this one. I'm joined once again by the lovely Pro Tour semi-finalist Shahmir Samee, joining in for another fantastic game of Titans of the game. Shahmir, what are we looking forward to here?
We're looking at a feature match here between Pablo Pintor, Pro Tour winner and calling winner at this point. I mean, probably in contention, one of the greatest players in the game, playing Oldhim, Grandfather of Eternity, into George Melisakis. And we're well past the elimination round, Scott. We're into the top 8 here. This is the semi-final.
Certainly are. All to play for here, including the glory of potentially retiring Oldhim in the process. This is a matchup we've kind of become very familiar with over the course of the weekend. Two of the metagames juggernauts battling head-to-head here. What are we looking for in this match, Shahmir?
It's a really dynamic matchup. That's one of the most exciting things about it, where both decks have really developed to kind of counter each other as the metagame has developed and deck building has changed. We could be seeing here, based on what we've seen with Pablo's build, generally a much more kind of defensive strategy, really trying to fatigue Lexi out, with the onus then being on Lexi to build these massive turns that can go over the top of Oldhim's defenses. So critical cards for building up those turns are undoubtedly the power cards, Rain Razors, and Three of a Kind. But you can be sure that Oldhim will be trying to stop those with his staunch Crown of Seeds and his Rampart of the Ram's Head.
Certainly sounds like a game of unstoppable force versus immovable object. Getting word that we are ready to go down in the feature match area, so it's time for us to move on down to the game. All right, so players setting up here. Very much an expected equipment loadout for me here. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary.
No, not particularly. I think it really depends on how much Lexi is concerned about some of the more recent technology that's emerged out of the Oldhim deck lately. The whole buckling blow combo, which we've seen kind of start tearing up the RTN meta, might have her playing Perch Grapplers, but nope, she's decided she's just going to go aggressive here and stick with the good old Snapdragon Scalers.
Seems super reasonable. Starting nice and early here, pitching away that Death Touch, getting it tucked away into that second cycle nice and early, setting up a hamstring shot, an arrow that's definitely made a bit of a resurgence in this aggressively slanted metagame. Looks like we're maybe moving to Arsenal here, setting up that nice early 6-card hand perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's a classic situation of Lexi going first, which is still not really ideal for her, but if she's in that spot, she'll go, okay, I'll just set up a 6-card hand going into next turn and hope you can't disrupt me too much.
Seems very reasonable. Players here just kind of taking their time over all these early decisions. Makes a lot of sense when they're under this amount of pressure. Many choices to whether you want to try and tax cards in a matchup where you expect to be going to fatigue, or whether just setting up those big hands is more important.
Well, we're only going with a single Arsenal here, so I think that's suggestive of a hand in which George actually had a lot of arrows and probably couldn't afford to Arsenal a second arrow so early in the game.
Very interesting here. Looks like we just have a Arsenal and pass in return as well. Pablo really hesitant to give up cards early for life that ultimately probably doesn't matter.
Sometimes a situation as well with Oldhim where when they're stuck with a 4-card hand, I think in that situation we were looking at a hand with a lot of blues in it, not really capable of pushing much damage back. If we were maybe seeing something like a Spinal Crush there, I think that there's a good chance that we see that thrown. But instead, Pablo just elected to pass there, and we're kicking off immediately with a Remorseless on George's side.
Yeah, Onslaught is beginning here. Nice early Crown of Seeds activation, pushing that Arsenal away, refilling the hand, fixing the options. Gonna see for the very first time in this game a very common procedure here, using this Rampart with another way of spending additional resources to cleanly block out a card. This time it's Brothers in Arms.
Yeah, and with Brothers in Arms, I think this is probably one of the clearest indicators that Pablo is really going for this slower fatigue type strategy, because this is a card that we just have not really seen emerge into the kind of Brav Oldhim deck list of going with massive attack actions and all of that, which Pablo is still playing a decent number of. But I think it's very indicative of him trying to play a slower strategy here, that he's playing a card like Brothers in Arms in his deck list.
Super interesting, a little hedge here as well, choosing to pitch that Endless Arrow away into the pitch stack and load this Heatseeker face up instead of putting it face down in the arsenal. Means we don't have to activate any Lexi abilities next turn, and we get that Endless Arrow back into the stack where we want it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the less you stress the Lexi ability, you find the more your lines open up. Because Lexi's ability is really critical in conjunction with something like a bolt and shot reload. So being forced to use it early, a face-up arsenal is generally going to give you much more lines of play available than a face-down one.
Certainly does. Leading on a Winter's Bite here. Really big fan of using these where possible in the Oldhim matchup. They can quite often get stuck in your pitch stack, and being able to play them proactively here when your opponent's Tunic isn't active to cover it means you're going to hopefully take away either Rampart, Crown of Seeds, or some other way of spending those resources quite as cleanly as the Oldhim player normally would.
Yeah, it definitely feels a bit more impactful into a matchup where they don't have their Crown of Seeds and Rampart, but sometimes stripping that one resource, or even two resources sometimes, we've seen Yellow Winter's Bite seeing play over the course of the season, can be really, really critical. And we're kicking off with a Yellow Bolt and Shot with +1 here.
Absolutely. Bit of an all-star in this Lexi deck. Bolt and Shot, definitely what enables a lot of these super wide, big damage turns. Great to play out proactively, great to pitch stack as well. Looks like it's going to be covered up really cleanly here with that Rampart, courtesy of some of those flowing resources.
And we haven't had an activation of the Crown yet, so it might be suggestive that Pablo is actually really interested in keeping his arsenal here, but it depends on kind of how George's turn proceeds. He's definitely thinking about that Heat Seeker, and that's one of the on-hits that he's really going to want to prevent this turn. So if George is feeling a little bit brazen here, we might be looking at a 3-arrow turn that ends with the Heat Seeker, or possibly just another setup turn.
Love this choice here from Pablo. We're pushing away the Crown activation here before we move on to our next attack. This actively disincentivizes George from closing the chain in any way for a Codex or even potentially firing that Heatseeker. Pablo made it pretty clear he's happy to block out with his hand here by blocking this Bolt and Shot with a Heatseeker being a known quantity, and happy to keep that Crown prevention available for the next attack proactively.
And there we're looking at that Arsenal pass. Yep, here's this setup turn. This is George definitely looking for an opportunity to build an even bigger turn, which suggests that face down card isn't an arrow. So could it be a Rain Razors? Could it be a 3 of a kind? I guess we'll see next turn.
Definitely expecting one of those power cards here. Tunic up to 3 for Pablo. Plenty of cards to work with due to George choosing to set up towards the end of that turn instead of fire that Heatseeker or the other cards in his hands. So maybe more options than he expected to have here.
It's one of those situations with Oldhim where when they have more cards than they expect to have in hand, sometimes it's like, well, I can't actually use all of these in a very proactive manner. But with Pablo activating the Tunic, hey, here's a Choke Slam.
That looks pretty
like
proactive to me. Choke Slam off the Tunic here. Fantastic 2-card hand. Gets to keep an arsenal for that Crown of Seeds. And of course, Choke Slam, relevant text in this matchup for shutting off the natural go again on Bolt and Shots if you give them +1, instead making them have to do so the old-fashioned way with Voltaire and give it go again.
And not just that, I mean, if we have the read on that face down card being a Rain Razors really doesn't do anything under a Chokeslam Crush effect. So I think this might end up being a must block from George here.
Not wrong. Looks like we are definitely leaning towards a block here, having somewhat of a middling setup turn once again, trying to make something slightly bigger in the face of this Chokeslam. Definitely feels that face down card could have led to a very proactive turn. We can see in this hand, Codex of Frailty 3 of a kind, so we definitely had some gas to work with this turn. Chokeslam throwing a spanner in the works.
It's 2 power cards stacked together. Unfortunately, coming at a time when when you are in the face of the disruption. So we'll see whether George is able to kind of just go for the hope for it, kind of 3 of a kind play, saving that Codex into a future turn off a Tunic. But it really depends on what that arsenal is. If that arsenal's a Rain Razors, I could see a world here where we're going 3 of a kind off the Tunic, Rain Razors, and off we go.
For sure. Definitely some of the hidden power of a card like 3 of a kind, allowing you to proactively block with some of your cards and still play out a very normal turn while preventing damage coming in from your opponent or these powerful, potent on-hits as well. I've heard the card likened to a imaginary carrion husk, and that's quite the endorsement.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the pros are saying these days. It's carrion husk 3 times in a game, and that's pretty good, turns out.
Certainly not bad in any way whatsoever. George looks like he could be debating activating Lexi here to flip this card over. Maybe we're looking to play out proactively. Maybe it is that Rain Razors and we're looking for this big early power turn to take the tempo away from Pablo.
All right, well, we've pushed for the 3 of a kind, and we're pitching the Codex as well, so that's suggesting we're not even feeling the need to keep it going into next turn either. So this is a pretty big commitment, and let's see what we have. Oh, a Premeditate. All right, not quite Rain Razors, but a pretty powerful card in and of itself. Nothing to be slept on.
For sure. Let's have this kind of super reasonable turn here, having blocked with 2 cards, making sure that Chokeslam didn't shut down this Premeditate, and still being able to fire 2 or maybe even 3 arrows here with the ability to keep an arsenal if we can score a hit for that Ponder token.
Looks like we're coming with a drill shot for 7 here. And as Oldhim, this is the one thing you do not want to let hit so early in the game. The Rampart is going to be doing a lot of work over the course of this game. So getting a -1 counter on it basically spells death. So I think this is going to be something we see Pablo take very seriously.
Absolutely, and definitely rewarded here for being so patient with this Heat Seeker in the early game. Very much the plan against Oldhim to kind of conserve these super relevant on-hits, your drill shots, your endless arrows, your Heat Seekers, to enable you to have a turn where they can't prevent them all scoring a hit and getting ahead in the game that way. Looking great so far.
Now, the sequencing here is really interesting. It tends to be with Lexi that you fire some of your less threatening arrows first, so that you say, oh, you can block this, or maybe there's something better coming later, and then often you actually do follow up with something better. Which suggests, well, is there another arrow in George's hand? Could it be better than a drill shot, or is this just a lot of mind games?
It's
we're going with a
battering bolt. Wow, this one normally in the deck as a concession to a deck like Dromai, but pretty clear here. George just shuffling together as many cards as he can to avoid that fatigue game plan from a deck that we've seen to be quite defensive in Pintor's Oldhim list. Nice clean block here again. Brothers in Arms looking fantastic in the face of this Bolton shot, and this it's drill shot. This barring bolt not really irrelevant or particularly scary on hit. Whether we block this very much depends on whether we think the Heat Seeker is coming afterwards.
Well, given the lack of resources available, it's unsurprising that Pablo's just going to choose to full block this. So we're looking at Pablo kind of stripped of his arsenal here, with George still having that Heat Seeker just ready for a future turn. This has kind of built a window in which the Rampart's not available, and it looks like we have drawn into a Rain Razors there, if I saw that correctly.
For sure.
So this might be just exactly the kind of punish that you need after destabilizing him for just one turn.
So for a lot of newer players, that turn maybe looked a bit suspect in the fact that Pablo didn't really take any damage and George spent a lot of cards. But as you noted, we took the Oldhim player off of an arsenal in a spot like this with a 5-card hand to follow up. How important is that in a matchup like this?
It's really critical for shutting off 2 key pieces of equipment that we talked about earlier. Both Crown of Seeds and Rampart in the Rand's Head need you to be pitching a card. And critically, Crown of Seeds needs a face-down card to be in your arsenal for it to function. If that's not the case, then there's very little incentive to even be pitching for the Rampart, because pitching a card to block 1 with the promise of maybe blocking again if the chain closes simply isn't really good enough. So we're looking at a situation now where some of Pablo's most powerful defensive equipment for shutting off breakpoints is now offline.
Offline had a fantastic time as well. That Rain Razors is being used here as an attempt to kind of leverage some damage while that Arsenal is away. Hamstring Shot coming down does definitely make those Choke Slams, Endless Winter style cards more awkward if it manages to hit, which it looks like it's going to do here, and hopefully be followed up by not only this Heat Seeker, but maybe another arrow as well.
With only 1 resource floating, it might be tough for it to be a 3-arrow turn, but who knows? We certainly could be seeing a situation in which I think it's unlikely for George to want to spend his Snapdragon so early that to facilitate a 3-arrow turn. I think it's more likely that we might just see the Heat Seeker fired off here for 7. But even that on its own can end up being a little bit difficult for Pablo to block out, while once again that Crown and Rampart is offline. So we might be seeing 3 whole cards just committed to block out. Ooh, we're going with a Codex though. Ooh. I take it all back, because this will facilitate a 3-arrow turn. If we get back a Bolton shot here, that'll have its power boosted by the Rain Razors, giving it natural go again, which then follows up with the Heat Seekers. We're looking at a 3-arrow Rain Razors turn with a Codex to kind of further disrupt Pablo's blocking capability. This is a pretty brutal pushback on this turn.
Definitely a great utilization of some of these iconic power cards from Lexi, in the immortal words of Brian Gottlieb. Who designed that?
Who designed
that indeed? Codex of Frailty looking fantastic here, offering that Ponder token, making sure we're going to have access to an arsenal even if we expend both of these arrows, and letting us provide pressure. Interestingly, however, this has given access of Crown of Seeds back to Pablo here, if that's something he's now interested in.
That it certainly has. It definitely diminishes the effect of something like the Rampart if the chain's already been broken. It's very unlikely for it to be broken again. But you can see Pablo's now just willing to take this damage, fully cognizant of the fact that we have to deal with this Heat Seeker for 7 coming in at the end, and he full blocks that nice and cleanly.
Super clean turn here, but managing to get some damage pushed through courtesy of Bolton Shot. Usually hoping to get a little more damage out of your Rain Razors, but there are 2 of those left in the deck, and this seems like a great way to score some early tempo. If I'm Pablo here, though, I don't think I'm too upset. I have my arsenal back, and I'm still at 37 life.
For sure. There's still a lot more to play in this game, which is, it's always one of the exciting things about the matchup. The onus really is on George here to be winning the game, because as the game drags longer and longer and he starts running out of cards in the deck, running out of power cards, it's going to get closer and closer.
Certainly seems so. Activation of Lexi here, turning up the Bolton shot. No bonus effects on this one. Just need access to that second Arsenal from New Horizons. Starting this turn with a bumped up Falcon Wing.
Falcon Wing probably being one of the most surprising cards to come out of Outsiders for me, just as a real role player, like the glue that holds the deck together, as a fantastic codex target, as something with innate go again, as just being a on rate, if somewhat unimpressive arrow, just coming in with that kind of 1 for 4 stat, or 0 for 4 stat line, shall I say, 1 for 4 if loaded with Voltaire. Yeah, just a really surprising card to have done so much work in all of these deck lists, but here it is kicking off the turn.
Yeah, I think so. A lot of people shocked by the inclusion of this one. Didn't necessarily think it was going to be great in Lexi, but it turns out arsenaling 2 arrows can be a little awkward without some go again. A surprisingly small turn here, just setting up that 6-card hand, only sending in this Falcon Wing. Maybe a bit of an awkward draw for George.
Possibly an awkward draw, but also possibly a very intentional decision where we, again, those big turns are the only way you're going to close out this game. So the situation where you fire 1 arrow to try and strip a card, or maybe even 2 cards from Oldhim's hand, and put them in a situation where, okay, you're down to a 3-card hand, 2-card hand, you can't really pressure me on a 2 or 3-card hand. That means that I know I can get to preserve all these 6 cards going into the next turn, and make next turn a real power turn. And it looks like there's the second Rain Razors coming out.
Very much indicative of what you were saying. Second Rain Razors here early. I wonder whether this is a kind of card we have to try and hold here, though. Feels like only a maximum of 3 arrows this turn. Pablo pretty happy to block. I wonder if this Rain Razors is good enough here.
We could be looking at a 4th, though, because this play that we're starting off with, this just, Bolton shot for 4, there's no go again, it's not got boosted power or anything, is absolutely telegraphing that I'm going to play that face-up Rain Razors. I mean, it's one of those, there's no way you make this play unless you're committing to this state right now. But maybe George is surprising us.
Certainly seems so. I was kind of smirking at that Snapdragon Scalers. Maybe we had a trick up our sleeves. Not a card you normally want to use outside of those really big Rain Razors turns, but it looks like we are just going to be happy here to load with Voltaire, keep an arrow for later, find some more cards, and just, again, kind of set up this pitch stack for later, keep these powerful red arrows tucked away for our final barrage, and hold on to that Rain Razors while still stripping 2 cards from Pablo's hand.
That was some serious bait. Very high-level play from George there.
Certainly love to see it. Pablo here does get a window to return, though. Pretty clearly not the best hand to operate here. We're proactively Crown of Seizing, maybe looking for just a card to throw to this Titan's Fist, chip away a little bit of damage while we keep our arsenal. But that's not coming. We are just cantripping away, setting up our own pitch stack, and putting another card back face down.
Okay, let's see. We're kicking off this turn with an Ice Quake, which is admittedly one of the more unusual cards to be seen in a Lexi deck these days. The kind of Ice Disruption packages has started to see a lot less play when Lexi is just kind of seen as the premier aggro deck who can just race people. Doesn't really need access to so much of that disruption anymore. But it pairs really well with this Bolton shot, because once again, just giving it natural go again, saying, I'm not even pressured now to play out the Rain Razors that you know is in my arsenal, but I can if I want to.
For sure. I feel like a card like Icequake here really helping with these incidental breakpoints. Clearly a card that's in the deck for those more aggressive matchups. Fantastic in the Lexi Mirror, but when it comes time to just shuffle it all together against a deck like Oldhim, it still has a role to play.
And it's really sent Pablo on the back foot here. I mean, he's sitting there now with 1 card in hand, having blocked out. I think he's really playing almost in fear of this Rain Razors, but more out of respect to it, understanding that if George is given the opportunity to really use this Rain Razors to its maximum potential, Pablo's going to be in a lot of trouble.
So in a game like... Yeah, for sure. For a game like this one, where George is holding on to this Rain Razors, only playing with 1 Arsenal slot, Pablo kind of blocking out repeatedly, not taking much damage. Who do we think this favors?
I mean, again, the onus really is on George to be assembling a big turn, and it looks like we're combining Rain Razors and 3 of a kind at minimum here, which is looking like it's a double.
Okay, this is a big turn. This is a full 6-card hand with a 3 of a kind. We've got 8 cards to work with, double Rain Razors. Every arrow here is going to be more like a mortar shell than an arrow.
Yeah, I mean, this is the turn. This is the turn in which George is presumably just going to commit pretty much everything he has. I wouldn't be surprised if we see as many as 3 equipment used on this turn. in service of really trying to maximize the power of these Rain Razors, and just having access to so many cards, so many resources, makes it actually very feasible to play out, all three of those equipment and just about every card in the hand. Coming in for 8 with Go again, just on a puny little Falcon Wing. Not so puny anymore.
I think the most interesting part of this, definitely just an immediate no blocks here from Pablo. Super in tune with the matchup, understands that this is not one of the threatening arrows. The things that you're scared of here, endless arrows, drill shots, heat seekers, those are the cards you're going to have to block because you can't block it all this turn. So that vanilla damage, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's a very strong understanding that just, you know what, this is the turn he built towards. I can't stop all of it, so I'll stop the important parts. But the important parts are still hitting hard. This is a heat seeker for 9, and we've already identified this as one of those serious on hits that can keep Lexi rolling through the game. So is Pablo really willing to commit 3 cards to block here?
Heatseeker, a very powerful one here, but definitely that looming fear here of a card like Endless Arrow still available through a card like Bullseye Braces, maybe even Bolt and Shot, the Quiver even, so plenty more arrows to come. Who's to say if this is going to be the most potent on hit? It's hard to want to commit 3 cards to this Heatseeker, but that Arsenal after a turn Nightless, still super threatening. This is looking fantastic for George.
When Pablo being stuck with a Sigil in hand here also is really probably diminishing his blocking capabilities, unless there's a Sink below or some kind of some way to get that out of the hand and replace it with something that's actually capable of defending against on hits. And I think he's letting it go.
Certainly looks like that might be the case here. Hard one to let that go. The Sigil definitely causing some problems for Pablo with no way to filter it out of his hand, but hopefully can use it to recall. Maybe we lied. Sink below here might buy us some time, might let us an extra card to block here, but this Heatseeker is going to score a hit, so regardless of how this turn plays out, we've got an Arsenal coming, and we've also got a very large Bolt and Shot on the way, courtesy of this Bullseye Braces. You've got to respect this one.
And this is the block 9, because that reload effect here is just so damning.
We're looking for one more arrow to fire. Quiver being popped. It's another Bolt and Shot.
Bolt and Shot.
This is so much damage.
Be more damning than this.
Pablo can't block this all out. This might mean we have yet another arrow if the last card in hand is a 0-cost arrow for George. This turn is an absolutely absurd amount of damage.
Complete belter. So it looks like, I seriously doubt Pablo's going to be committing any kind of armor here. There's just no reason to half block this. So it's another 7 damage going to the face, which means Pablo's down to 15. And we see just how well George can leverage this reload. He's going for the reload.
Oh, it's following up with a searing shot.
For 8 on hit goes to 9. Pablo's going to be down to 5 after this turn.
Didn't we start this turn like 35 or something?
So, I heard you like power turns, Lexi.
Wow, talk about a comeback mechanic, premeditate into Arsenal here. What was looking arguably quite difficult for George here with so many cards being expended early. It looks like a commanding position from here. That's a 41 damage turn to pull George not only back into this game, but firmly ahead.
Firmly ahead indeed. So, and we've still got, so that's all the Rain Razors expended at this point. That's the critical thing. So we've seen, I believe we've seen an Art of War pitch earlier, so there is still a little bit more gas in the tank for some of these kind of force amplifier power turns. But Pablo's probably, I wouldn't say he's breathing a sigh of relief, but he can at least take some solace in the fact that there's no more of those Rain Razors.
For sure. All the Rain Razors gone. 2 of the 3 other kinds gone. I think one of the Codex of Frailties gone. There's obviously some still Art of War, still some more deadly disease-ridden books in there, but we are working our way through these power cards. This turn, however, once again giving a sneaky go again to this Bolt and Shot, courtesy of Premeditate. Looking pretty good here. How much do you have to respect this time?
I think George is showing a little bit of weakness here in the fact that he's pitched a red Infecting Shot to load that Bolt and Shot, which suggests that if he wants to fire another arrow this turn, he's going to be pitching his other card. So he could go completely all in on this Bolt and Shot, on this Premeditate turn, with the intent of firing 2 arrows. I think Pablo's probably in a good position here to try and call the bluff and fully block out this Bolt and Shot with the intent of going, okay, you're probably not going to fire another arrow this turn. If you do, there's a good chance I can block it out. And if I do that, then you're on no Arsenal going into next turn, which is a serious stabilization point for me.
For sure. Starting off with the kind of ever-present activation of Crown of Seeds here, kind of getting ourselves a little bit more information. And looks like we're going to be able to use those resources extremely proactively with an Oasis Respite in the hand, gaining a little bit of that lost life back.
It's a super impressive defensive hand. I think we've also got an Autumn Touch in hand as well, which more than likely will block 3, given the amount of damage dealt so far in this game. But if we see any surprises, it can also be used towards that Earth React.
Even
which is,
better here. The
more
sink
options.
below covering this up nicely, meaning that Crown Prevention still available for any follow-up arrow.
The Crown holds and the Rampart is unused. It's definitely not the ideal state for George. I think we might end up seeing another just kind of like Arsenal Pass setup here with this Premeditate sadly not doing what it was designed to do. But stripping cards is stripping cards. We take that.
Super interesting turn here. George taking a look through the graveyard, no doubt just kind of figuring out what power cards he has left, maybe thinking back to how that pitch stack started and when he expects those cards to be coming back around. We can't be too far from that stage of the game now. Looks like we are choosing to put that Endless Arrow back into the stack and keeping the Falcon Wing in the arsenal. What do you think of that?
I think it's another situation where we're kind of preparing for a multi-arrow turn with the ability to hold up the Lexi activation. Again, just kind of preparing for situations in which we draw an Art of War, which is now conspicuously in hand. Definitely being very conservative with holding these Endless Arrows, trying to really make sure that they survive to the end game so that if we can get them to chip through, they just like buffer the deck a little bit more, keep a little bit more gas in the tank to try and close out the game.
So, full 5 cards to work here for George. Pablo, really interesting hand here. It does contain a Heart of Fiendel. Not the kind of card you want to see when your opponent plays an Art of War.
Well, yes and no. The funny thing about Heart of Fiendel in Oldhim, and the funny thing about many cards in Oldhim is, well, if it doesn't block and it's a blue, you can still pitch it to Crown and Rampart. And in this situation, when you pitch it to Crown and Rampart, you're gaining a life too. It's one of the incredible things about a card like Crown of Seeds, that it really kind of reduces the opportunity cost of playing these non-block cards in your deck.
For sure. Well, George doesn't want to see any longer of this game. We're going for another power turn. Art of War finds the 3 of a kind. This is the last 3 of a kind, though.
It is the last 3 of a kind, but we are at least seeing. I mean, this is what you want to be using your 3 of a kinds for. You want to pair them with other kind of power cards and force amplifier cards, because on its own, it just says, okay, 3 extra cards. Well, you can still only fire a maximum of like 2 to 3 arrows a turn without committing equipment. But in combination with these kind of force multiplier cards, then the card advantage from a card like 3 of a kind really starts to come into effect.
Tunic pays for the Crown here to give us maximum information going into how we want to block this turnout. Really interesting to see this Falcon Wing getting blocked out in full. Definitely suggestive of the fact this hand is going to be super defensive.
Yeah, we're following up with a Searing Shot here, which is coming in for 5 with Go Again. I mean, these Searing Shots are probably going to add up, because this is all things considered one of the least threatening on-hits in Lexi's deck. But the least threatening on-hit here is basically a 0 for 6 Go Again arrow. So, if that's the least you have to worry about, I'm a little concerned about the rest of the deck.
Yeah, we are certainly getting to on-hit, lose the game territory, but it looks like we have a good way of putting this hand together. Another Oasis Respite here for Pablo means that Heart not only going to be able to pay for Rampart potentially, maybe even the Ironhide Legs, but going to be able to use all those resources, gain life from the Oasis, gain life from the Heart, somehow finding a way to stabilize through these power turns.
It's a pretty interesting position. I wonder what I can't quite see what's in the rest of Pablo's hand, but we're choosing to commit actually kind of 6 points of block effectively into that 5 power arrow, which is not the Oldhim standard of I'm going to block everything hyper efficiently. It's pretty interesting.
That Creative Fist is blocking an extra point of damage if you think about it in a weird way.
Yeah, it's true, I suppose. It's trying its best. It's really saying, I'm going to stop that on hit no matter what.
Certainly love to see it. And Creative Fist here definitely been saved throughout this game. There's many options where it could have jumped in front of a Heat Seeker, and definitely goes to show that Pablo looking for a window where keeping an arsenal is important, and it buys him that extra card.
It's really absolutely critical to save your armor for big turns like this one, and big turns like, I mean, what we saw just a couple turns ago with that double Rain Razor's turn. I mean, that's a pretty reasonable situation to commit armor, but I think the way the arrows lined up, it was just that Creative Fist couldn't actually commit to full blocking anything, and because of that, well, there's not much reason to go half measures with Lexi and with blocking in this matchup.
For sure. 6-card hand set up here once again from George, looking to secure that final volley. But Pablo, again, just doing this fantastic job keeping an Arsenal here and stabilising. We were down at 5, we're now back at 9. We're somehow gaining life throughout these power turns from Lexi and working our way through Art of Wars, through the last 3 of a kind. Bolton shot here, sheepishly fired from the Arsenal. Are we snapping this? Are we giving it go again some kind of funky way?
Oh, I think we're looking at a cheeky Art of War.
Oh.
What a reward.
I mean, you go back some ways, doing this in this stage of combat used to be super dangerous into Oldhim when you could get ice reacted as a result and lose your only attack and stop you from banishing and drawing cards. But these Oldhims, they're just not playing these ice cards these days, and it kind of opens up these tricky plays that maybe were a little more dangerous in the past.
Rest in peace, Winter's Whale. Gone but not forgotten.
Certainly not forgotten, that's for sure. Banishing a Frostlock in this case, looking to find a little more red arrows to work with. It's the drill shot being pitched here to activate Voltaire for the first time this turn. Looks like we're loading up a possible choice of arrows here. The first endless arrow of the game being fired. This is a really threatening one to be in front of a Codex of Frailty.
Yeah, I like this commitment because, I mean, the ideal situation actually here about committing your first endless arrow is because that Codex is face up on an Art of War turn. It's saying, I'm going to play this turn, and if you block out this endless arrow, which you really should, by the way, guess what I can just get back with my Codex?
Sequencing this game from both players has honestly been a bit of a masterclass. George showcasing exactly how important it is to set up these big power turns as the Lexi player, looking to breach these defenses. And Pablo in return just showing you how good it is to combine these resources, make sure you're getting the most out of your crown and your rampart by using that extra resource for something else beneficial, like an Oasis Respite, not being scared to block out with his entire hand when it's required, and really kind of showcasing what you can do to shut these Lexi players down.
Yeah, the follow-up here is really critical. With 2 resources still floating, and I think that's a couple of cards in hand. Ooh, okay, hang on. We've got a Staunch Response here. Again, that's a bit of an overblock. But, I mean, if there's one thing that you're going to say, I am absolutely not letting you have that back, it's probably going to be an Endless Arrow in this situation.
I think Pablo might be okay with this, right up until this drill shot comes in. This is a bit sketchy. Do we have a way to cover this up? We can use our armor to keep the rampart safe, but if this drill shot is earning your armor, I think that's a fantastic exchange for George.
I mean, this is another situation where now George gets so many options with what to do with this Codex of Frailty, and it really depends on how Pablo blocks. If he's going to commit something like his Crater Fist, his last card in hand, and his Rampart to be blocking out this 5-power drill shot, then, well, I'll Codex of Frailty it back and fire it again. And now you just have an arsenal, no resources floating. Cool. I'll hit you with a drill shot for 5 and bye-bye Rampart.
In a spot like this, do you think you're looking to crown now before the Codex, knowing that it will put another card into your arsenal? Or do you think you can't afford to?
It's really, really dangerous. I think given one of the ways in which you can try and play around Codex, and it's a very rare one because it's requires so much commitment to defense, is actually that you empty your hand prior to the Codex being played. You empty your hand and arsenal, such that the Codex is actually pure card advantage for you in the same way that it kind of is pure card advantage for the Lexi player. But it requires a very kind of specific setup, and I'm not really sure whether we'll be able to pull that off here. So emptying the arsenal, for instance, activating the crown here, will end up with 2 cards in hand. So when that Codex hits, one of those cards is going to be discarded, which means that the Codex target is going to hit at that point.
Both players just kind of filtering through the graveyards here, getting an understanding of what power cards are remaining, checking what Codex targets are available for both players in these kind of really important pressure turns of this matchup. Every kind of card counts.
Pablo considering the block carefully here.
Definitely a tough one here. Only 1 card to work with, potentially 2 after the crown a little later on. We do have the resource for that, but this drill shot's on here is definitely kind of causing havoc with Pablo's ideal play patterns. Definitely think I would rather be in the Ranger seat at the moment.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, look at those life totals. I mean, I'd love to be playing this game and just looking for an opportunity. Come on, it's just 8 more life. What's 8 more life?
What's 8 more? That's quite the damning statement. You love to see it. Usually lethal in this case, in fact. So I'd much rather not be taking taking 8 more from you. Pablo definitely with the kind of going through the grinder here. It's one hell of a decision. I feel like this is arguably the most important turn of the game so far. Feels like the way we sequence these final on hits, whether this Rampart survives, what this Codex is targeting, feel like they're probably game deciding decisions here, and with so much on the line, you really can't blame these players for taking their time.
It's going to shape the rest of the game for sure, because I mean, losing the Rampart just suddenly means that in the same way that kind of being unable to use Crown makes the Rampart unimpressive, being unable to use the Rampart properly makes the Crown unimpressive. So all of a sudden, it just switches off 2 pieces of equipment for the price of 1, effectively.
Certainly a bit of a bind for Pablo to find himself in, but there's any kind of player you'd want to be backing in a scenario like this, it's definitely a Pro Tour champion who might be able to dig their way out of this hole. But looking fantastic at the moment for George. Definitely got kind of all the tempo on their side, all of the kind of control of the flow of the game on their side with these big power turns so far, just putting Pablo through the absolute grinder.
Perhaps one of the most interesting things in this situation, actually, is that George still seems to have... Ooh, okay.
So we can see why this was such a tough decision. The Autumn's Touch really allowed there to be all kinds of options here through the Earth React, through blocking with the card, paying for Staunch Response. Maybe you wanted to use the Shield now, expecting the combat chain to close. You can see why there was so much to think about.
Oh, but I like this line a lot. This is what I was describing earlier, where you've gone empty-handed at the time when a Codex is played, and just nab card advantage off of it.
Speaking of card advantage, the Codex of Inertia here, stopping the card advantage that we thought we might be getting from Codex of Frailty. If you wanted an attack back from your arsenal for a later turn, it's not there anymore. You've got to deal with a random card instead. And it's not going to be there for long, courtesy of that Inertia.
Yeah, with Lexi use this turn, it's a pretty tough one as well. It's not a very easy spot to be in, because we can't flip that card up and then use the Codex of Frailty. So I think the way this turn proceeds really comes down to what George's top deck was.
Super interesting. I hadn't even realized the Lexi has been used this turn. You're right. Really narrows the options as to what you can do here. It's kind of hard to let this be a setup turn unless you really want to commit your Snapdragon Scalers next turn potentially to clear open space. So now George the one with all the decisions. Very much comes down to what we found off that Codex of Inertia and what he previously thought he wanted to grab from that Codex of Frailty as a target. All kinds of decisions here. Looks like we're able to play that card out. It's a blue drill shot.
Drill shot. Oof, the pressure on this Rampart is unreal. Coming in for just 3. But with a card in Arsenal and Crown unused this turn, this is exactly this. I think this is a really, really good spot for Pablo, where he can choose to now activate the Crown, end up with a card in hand, still have a resource left over to use the Rampart. So his blocking capability is still remaining very, very high. And in the face of an Inertia, knowing that you can't keep an Arsenal, this is just a full block turn.
Definitely rewarded here for the choice of that Staunch Response, choosing it to block with the Rampart and our legs using those 2 resources. Is this card in the arsenal a Sigil of Solace or something to that effect that we can get some value off before this Inertia goes off?
It's clearly something he values highly. Ooh, okay, so George here just electing to pass the turn. He's not choosing to commit something like the Snapdragons here and go further on his Art of War turn. He's saying, nope, that's enough, that's okay. But it means that ultimately, I mean, I think that turn literally just dealt 1 damage from that initial Bolton shot with the surprise Art of War.
Interesting. So we chose to let the card go back to the bottom of our deck instead of crowning away there, meaning that we didn't really care about that Inertia token. Super interesting here. George choosing not to arsenal another card, doesn't want to have to commit the Snapdragons to an arrow with that Codex already face up. Lots of super interesting decision points here for both of these players.
Yeah, that last turn, I mean, there's probably so many ways to play that last turn. I think I can respect what Pablo was trying to do there with playing around the second Codex by, if you activate the Crown in that situation towards the end of that turn, and then George follows up with Snapdragons into another Codex, well, you're discarding the card that you've just drawn now, which significantly reduces your defensive capability. But here's a Winter's Bite without Tunic up, which is exactly the time you want to be seeing them and want to be playing them.
Certainly coming back around, scoring a free resource. The Boulder Trap here, definitely
Oh,
looking
hello.
a little bit awkward when we definitely would have preferred to have another arrow to fire, but we still get to chain Hamstring here into Frailty. Do we think that's enough damage, or are we holding this Frailty again?
I mean, he's already committed the Premeditate. I think it's a pretty clear indication that at the very least, this Hamstring is going to be fired. But there is a chance that he actually goes for +1 and chooses to fire it for 9. Now we're going for the 8 with Go Again, so we're holding up the potential of maybe using this Codex. But Codex is a card that's really interesting in that it doesn't tend to stack very well with Premeditate, because you're pushing more damage. Sure, you're pushing the Onhead to Premeditate, but you've already got a Ponder from your Codex, so your second Ponder does a lot less than your first one.
For sure. Once again, cleanly blocked out here from Pablo, using those resources super efficiently on the Rampart. Fate Foreseen once again covering at that breakpoint, just keeping his hamstring shot away from his life total, something that he's just all about right now.
George being in a tricky spot where, because he's chosen the Go Again, he's kind of committed towards playing the Codex now, but it doesn't really seem like an opportune moment to do it. So there's a chance we just see a pass here, but a pass without a second arsenal.
For the folks back home who maybe are thinking about picking up Lexi, how often do you pick Go Again with a card like Codex of Frailty in your arsenal to represent the ability to play it even if you don't intend to?
There's definitely like the bluff factor to consider, and I think it definitely is suggesting, oh, I could have more coming here. But when your hand's already emptied and the information is kind of face up, I think sometimes it's actually more important to get the 1 point of value when you know it's assured. But I can see why George maybe wanted to keep his options open here, just in case Pablo had a really inefficient block on that hamstring shot, and it seemed like a good window to use the Codex.
Pablo certainly back to where he wants to be, tunic up, arsenal full for that crown of seeds, but we're starting to turn off with a remorseless. So if there is any D-reacts tucked away there in the arsenal, they're probably going to have to get crowned away.
But that's the thing. I mean, with normally Remorseless would punish a D-react in the arsenal so much by just saying, nope, that card can do literally nothing. Whereas Crown of Seas just says, oh, that's fine. You can block one anyway. You know what? You can even block two with courtesy of the Rampart.
So George taking his turn once again to just earn cards here and try and take Pablo off of his arsenal before the big power turn happens. Codex of Inertia, fantastic tool that's seeing play in a number of these Lexi decks to do exactly that, kind of take away that arsenal, make paying for Crown and Rampart super unfeasible to make those breakpoints way more likely to hit. Super interesting this one, we're back at our pitch stack. That Codex of Inertia discards the Death Touch, which is now a target for that Frailty.
Death Touch being a pretty unusual choice to be in a Lexi deck these days, but I can absolutely see the power of it. I mean, when this card was spoiled, my goodness gracious, we were thinking about that restriction of it, how it can't be played from hand, but that's a 1 for 8 basically in Ranger, which is just absurd. When we're following up with a good old Endless Arrow, this is the second one fired this game.
Certainly
and
is.
It's saying you better give me some cards here if you don't want me to, maybe snaps, load this again, fire it again, Codex of Frailty, do something after that.
Certainly feels like an arrow that has to be respected here to not just kind of allow a very strong turn on behalf of George. Is there ever an argument to earn these Snapdragon Scalers in this spot and kind of get them gone, or are you not worried about that at this point?
I think the danger with trying to take little chips of damage here is that Endless Arrow isn't just kind of representing the 4 right now, but it's representing the 4 Go Again when it bounces back to hand and gets loaded with Voltaire again, and then it represents what comes off the Codex. So there are other arrows where you can kind of try and bait the Snapdragons in, try and take a little bit more risk, but with something like an Endless Arrow that provides so much card advantage, I think maybe that's a little bit of a risk.
Seems very fair. Great setup here once again for George, however, getting that 6-card hand ready to go on a turn where the inertia has cleared Pablo's arsenal. The hand has been drawn up. We see an Art of War and what looks like another Codex. Is this the final power turn George needs to get over the line here?
It's a tricky spot because codices don't tend to stack very well on top of one another. If you get too many of them together, you can find that it's actually really hard to be playing them without actually discarding a card. So there's a decent chance, I think, that we see it actually pitched to maybe even fund this turn with the hope of using it even going into third cycle at this point.
So, information, the most important aspect of this tunic used to pay for the Art of War. Going to banish away that Frostlock as the only attack we had to kind of facilitate our choices. A fused Frostlock here. Is this something that Oldhim should be concerned about?
If there were D-React in hand, I would say so. That on-hit effect is basically entirely negligible into Oldhim, but really it's that first ability. Cards and activated abilities cost opposing heroes an additional 1 this turn, which, if he was thinking about using, say, his Tunic or his Crown of Seeds, that then he would have to consider that a lot more seriously. So the Crown of Seeds being offline and no D-React in hand kind of makes it the only decision point is here, do I need to float the Tunic maybe for this Rampart? And I think the turn is a little bit face up because we're seeing this coming in for 5 with no go again on an Art of War turn, which I think means the Snapdragons are officially committed this turn. There's kind of no two ways about it for George.
Certainly feels like if they aren't committed, you certainly don't mind that outcome either. Pablo kind of doing something I encourage all players to do when they're not exactly sure about how something works. Just take the time to double check a card that maybe you're not super familiar playing into. In a spot like this, understanding that you need to take your Tunic resource like Pablo just did before that arrow is attacking you is something that could definitely win or lose you a game in certain spots.
Yep, I think it's going to give him the one extra block on the Rampart here, which is pretty critical.
Debating these choices here, definitely seems like we are going to be blocking for leaking that extra point of damage over from the Frostlock. Snapdragon Scaler's committed to this to continue the turn, much like we expected, but Pablo finally takes a little bit of damage for what feels like the first time in forever.
1 point of damage, let's go!
Hey, that's like 1/8 of the way there. That's fantastic.
That's true. We take the small steps. You got to take every little victory sometimes against Fatigue Oldhim because he really is the wall. Every little chip that you get through is just a little victory.
Certainly is. So looking for some big red arrows to follow this up. Interesting. Choosing to close the chain here, even though the Rampart has been activated, to play a Winter's Bite.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting one, I've got to say, because I think it opens up a lot of options for Pablo here. He doesn't seem to have, neither player seems to have represented that the chain had closed there, and thus that the Rampart is available to block again. But with playing a Winter's Bite actually leaves the resources up for Pablo to pay for the Rampart an additional time. So I think if he picks up on that and realizes that actually, hang on, I've got 2 free block just sitting there on the board. And in the face of this Codex, no less, where the Codex will hopefully end up refilling the arsenal, then that pays for a Crown of Seeds, or maybe even a third use of the Rampart, depending on how George decides to sequence this turn.
I actually think this was a super heads-up play maybe from George here in a spot where he knows he has to close the chain again anyway for Codex of Frailty, and kind of being okay if all of those resources go into the Rampart, because otherwise they were going to get spent on the Crown once the arsenal was full again, potentially. So maybe using that Winter's Bite as a way to potentially entice Pablo into using the Rampart more than he should, which definitely could be a pretty heads-up one. We're seeing the Codex from hand here instead of the one from Arsenal. I'm assuming that's something you normally prioritize in spots like this?
I mean, playing the one from Arsenal here would necessitate you discarding the one from hand is the big downside of it. Whereas if it's your last card in hand, you play it, you get back your card into your second Arsenal slot, and you go, oh, after this card, oh no, I have no cards in hand. But I still have a Codex in my Arsenal and the arrow that I just brought back, so we're still going.
For sure. I should say more like there wasn't a world where we try and weave the Codex into our pitch deck, courtesy of Voltaire or something like that, to try and save it for another turn and get it back in circulation. We'd much rather just keep the one that we've been holding in Arsenal for the last 5 turns.
Yeah, I think there is potential to, well, I think there's potential. The decks are looking really, really thin, and that is a bit of a concern if you're going to try and go for any kind of third cycle play here. So this might be George's kind of Hail Mary play of saying, all right, we're just going to go for it.
Certainly looks like it. We're grabbing the Boltwin shot here, which means it's going to have some natural go again, courtesy of this Art of War, meaning this second Codex can follow it if we're trying to push more damage. We have been somewhat successful in stripping cards from Pablo so far, but we are turning that Crown of Seeds on here. There are resources floating, and that Rampart can get even bigger.
You know, I don't think any of the codices played this game have actually forced a discard, which is probably one of the most concerning things about the way that they've been played. Obviously, one of the strongest things about the card is that when your opponent is forced to kind of bring back a card from their graveyard and put it into Arsenal, they're also going to lose a card from hand which they can block with. But Pablo has seen it so face up every time that a Codex has come that he's just been like, I'm going to empty my hand. I'm going to throw everything away so that if you play a Codex, it's just card advantage for me. I'm just getting a free card in my Arsenal. And that means a free activation of the Crown of Seeds.
Definitely some intricate navigation and a kind of a showcase of exactly how good someone like Pablo Pintor is at the game of Flesh and Blood, kind of maximizing all of those edges, something that definitely came back to reward him in a game that ended up being this close after that incredible power turn from George. This bow and shot is coming in for 5 with Go Again here. We know that Death Touch is face down courtesy of the other codex. Bow and shot here feels like mostly vanilla damage, but how much of this can you really afford to take in a spot like this?
It's a very close one. I think this might be a situation where Pablo has to take a very significant chunk of this damage, quite possibly all of it, go down to 3, because that Death Touch on hit representing 2 additional damage potentially is just not acceptable at this point in the game. I think we are going to see that Death Touch fully blocked, which, let's assume he's drawing a 3 block, is going to be 3 block from hand, Rampart for 2, Crown for 1, but that's still only 6. We'd probably also see one of the pieces of armor committed as well. In which case, I suppose you could commit something like, I don't know, one of the other pieces of armor to blocking here, but I think it's very all in on what is, as we've already discussed, basically just vanilla damage.
Definitely seemed like a serious consideration there for Pablo, making the play, taking the damage, knowing that he has to cover up this Death Touch for 7, otherwise that on-hit does threaten lethal. Crown activated, all the armor going in the way, we can't afford to let that one connect.
No risks whatsoever. But with that, I mean, how much has George got left in his deck at this point? I mean, how much is there to actually close out the game? I think that's all the Art of Wars played. It's certainly all the Codices played, all the Rain Razors played, all the 3 of a kinds played. I mean, what can be left? I see an Endless Arrow in there, but a naked Endless Arrow is pretty blockable.
The deck's looking mighty thin here. We're definitely seeing the rewards of George setting those red arrows back into his pitch stack earlier on. We kind of commented on it when these remorselesses and these endless arrows were being pitched away kind of inefficiently on turns, kind of setting up these final turns, allowing him to still have some damage left in his deck here. Pablo is off of an arsenal. There is no real efficient way of using all those resources by pitching a card. This might be George's last push.
Let's see. I mean, it's a pretty good window. A 3-arrow turn here could mean a lot. And with an Oasis Respite in hand, that means you're pretty much priced into pitching at least 1 card this turn anyway. So, let's see. I mean, the fact that this game is close at all after, as we said earlier, literal 41 damage turn from Lexi is just incredible.
For sure. A testament to the matchup and a testament to both of these players. The drill shot being pitched here to facilitate this turn. Have to imagine we're looking at a 3-arrow turn here, hopefully sending something that's just kind of damaged before the endless arrow we previously talked about. Looks like it's time for Bolton shot to shine. Definitely can kind of see we're getting down to the dregs of the arrows here. This is a blue one.
Bolton shot blue coming in for 3 go again. Well, I think Pablo at this point is very happy to trade card for card. He's just going through, making sure, okay, can I get juked by anything here? How many Art of Wars are left? How many Rain Razors are left? Any kind of instant speed damage that I have to worry about. Thankfully, at this point, I mean, all of the cards that are left in George's deck should be somewhat face up because they've all been pitched at this point. So he's not worried about something like a Lightning Press coming out, but you can see him there counting away the Rain Razors, counting away the Art of Wars, and making sure there is no surprise damage coming this turn.
For sure. Rain Razors, that's super important one here, kind of jutting out of the pile in Pablo's hand, because, 2 damage would be all of it right now. Got to make sure all of those are out of the way. Committing a card here seems super reasonable, making sure that we don't just die by accident. But Endless Arrow here coming in. This is some relevant on-hits, but I'm not sure how much that matters in a situation where we only have 2 life to play with.
Yeah, it's quite possible here that actually, I think at this point, because Lexi can't actually leverage the on-hit this turn. Okay, now Pablo is electing to block that using the Oasis Respite, which is gonna gain a life here. That is no small feat gaining a life on that.
These are
blocking 4 there, so still taking 1 this turn with the Remorseless on-hit, but Remorseless on-hit doesn't really do anything if I've got no cards in hand and then tend to play no action cards.
No, for sure. The kind of excess point covered up by the Oasis there. It's hard to understate just how good the 3 Oasis, the Heart of Fiendel, have been this game without the incidental life gain of those cards. Even the Sigil of Solaces, Pablo's not alive here.
I think Pablo's getting 9 life, maybe even 12 life over the course of this game, which is, I mean, he'd be at -10 without it. So I think it's very clear just how important that is to him continuing this game plan. And we really are down to all blues here. Call Miles Davis because it's all blues.
Nice. Yeah, this one is definitely kind of showcasing kind of the end game for Lexi if you can get through those power turns. But these blues aren't kind of to be laughed at. It's a little awkward here. We have so many infecting shots, but those are still infecting shots. Those are arguably blue arrows that threaten significantly more than any other, because you can't just take 1 damage in the face of these and be okay.
Okay, we've got a red one here, and a red one represents some real damage. I mean, that's demanding 2 cards, because that on hit is a Blood Rot Pox, and a Blood Rot Pox is 2 damage, which is lethal. So, but I think Pablo's pretty willing to give 2 cards here. I mean, he's very willing to just throw away any number of cards to keep blocking out the turn. And with George unable to be firing 4 arrows over the course of this game, and we're looking at a very clean block right here.
Brothers in Arms once again looking incredible here. Last card just snapped immediately, blocks off the other infecting shot. Very much down to the grind here. Oldhim not able to keep an arsenal at any point. George desperately scraping a hand together that can leak just 2 damage through a 4-card hand. 2 cards left in deck, I think, and that horrible boulder trap coming back around here.
Pablo, I think, intentionally or otherwise, I'm going to say intentionally, because, I mean, with a player like him, how could it not be intentional? Has been playing around that all game, and it's just hilarious to think about.
Not a single hammer swing has been sent, not even on turn 0, just consciously aware of the card for the entire game, to the point where now it's just a blank card. It doesn't do anything. It's stuck in the deck and can't help George finish this game. These blue arrows struggling to get those final points of damage through.
He's flipped the deck, and that's
and we're done.
Pablo has fatigued George Melisakis after a 41 damage double Rain Razor's 3-of-a-kind turn.
That might be one of the most incredible games of Flesh and Blood I have ever seen.
It's not the outcome I expected, I'll tell you that. If you'd call back to me half an hour ago who was saying George has this game, I mean, how could he not after a turn like that? And Pablo just on tenterhooks the entire game, hanging by a thread, but hanging on all the same. That's the tenacity that you expect from a one-time Pro Tour champion and one-time calling champion. Who knows? Maybe even a 2-time calling champion.
That is Pablo Pintor. Moving on to the finals, keeping us in contention for an Oldhim living legend this weekend. Maybe even the second hero that Pablo Pintor is going to send off into the horizons. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back very, very shortly for your final of the calling in Antwerp.